in case it isn't there, Postcards from Elsewhere, Volume 1, 1988 to 2001, by Arnie Mohill. This is my author's note. Why postcards? Well, even before I acquired the blank book into which many of the details of these short pieces were recorded, I was sketching them out in numerous postcards to friends and acquaintances back home. And thus I owe a great debt of gratitude to my many correspondents for providing me initially with concrete destinations for these reflections on my travel experiences. As the years passed and my trips to Bali continued, there emerged this project of creating a collection of these musings, and yet many of them were still begun as snail mail postcards, subsequently transcribed and modified into my daily journal, and then expanded or contracted at home in New York City, where I use their scribbled details as a memory tool to recreate and preserve moments otherwise ephemeral. I have never been able to keep a journal at home. It is only travel that has elicited any discipline in this regard. Older now, I find it a curious fact that such large blocks of my time home in the States have slipped away, their details lost, whereas these days spent abroad remain fresh and clear, thanks to my having polished these postcards like gems over and over again for many years. In a profound way, then, they are postcards to myself. I also did not take many photographs for at least the first decade of my travels. I would bring one of those disposable Kodak contraptions, and a few of the photos would survive the vagaries of light and time. But on the whole, the only technique I had of preserving impressions was verbal. This volume begins in the pre-email, pre-digital era, an era of primitive fax machines and overpriced and unreliable long-distance connections. For the first few years, even electricity was a luxury only to be found in town, an hour's walk from home. It may well have been my sense of isolation, thus, that set me to work so diligently, sending forth these postcards that took at least 2 weeks to get where they were going, if they got there at all. My pen became my camera, and no event seemed too minor for a quick, longhand snapshot. In composing and arranging this volume, I did not intend to unfold the whole narrative of my journeys. I am present, undoubtedly, but I found myself eliminating much personal data and much connective tissue. Rather, my intention has been to isolate certain details, impressing them on time the way they have been impressed on my mind. Travel has a way of clearing the mind, wiping its slate clean of old habits and ways of seeing, readying it for a welter of new images. I was intent on capturing those images, but gently, so as not to damage their wings. And these journals have provided me with source material for many poems as well. Indeed, readers may find here and there in this book prose versions of formal poems that have been published in other places. I have long been a believer that poetry can be found in prose as well as in verse, as well as out in that astoundingly wide world. I have merely tried to reach out and catch it and hold it, however I can, for that moment which lasts forever on the page. This volume takes me up to a point where I stopped traveling for a few years due to complications, including ill health on the heels of an HIV-positive diagnosis. When my strength returned, my travels resumed, along with my journal, and I have been transcribing those years of notes as well into a second volume, one that differs a bit from this first volume in that I am trying to be more narratively thorough. Perhaps It is my advancing age that will give Volume 2 more of the flavor of a travel memoir. But in the meantime, I offer this flock of images.